Welcome to Mada Fyah, the show that dives into the climate crisis in Belize. I'm André.
And I'm Digna. For today's episode, we will be talking about deforestation and forest conservation.
Joining us today, we have Dr. Elma Kay, the Science Director at the University of Belize's Environmental Research Institute.
Before we begin our discussion, we will be sharing our moment of gratitude, 1 minute of rage. Each week, André and I swap a moment of gratitude for a minute of rage on any topic that's been on our minds in the past week. This week is my time to share my appreciation. I'm thankful for having such supportive loved ones. I know that sometimes I may have trouble showing my soft side and might not always tell them how grateful I am to have them in my life, but I would do almost anything for them. They always know how to cheer me up and are always there when I need them. And for that, I am very thankful.
That's very sweet. I was just thinking when you said almost, I got a vibe that there was something they wanted, and you're just like anything but that.
I have my limits.
No, that's good. That's good. We all need boundaries, even from our loved ones. Okay, I'll hop into the minute of rage. So my minute of rage is concerning what I consider to be a systematic abuse of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic situation on behalf of the police and anybody in charge of sort of punitive carceral punishments. I say this both in terms of somebody who feels like the curfew at this point is simply a crime measure used to punish people for being out beyond a certain time and just to, levy fines. And I don't think it's in any way effective at curtailing the spread of the vaccine. Not at a time when we're accepting tourists by the dozen, as many as we can get in. More generally, I really don't like the way in which the police continue. I know that the strikes are momentarily on pause, but the threats by police and talking as if they're, putting up with the protests as if it's not the right of these teachers to be on the streets. That was really enraging, because there's this impression that the police are getting that they must be the ones who decide whether or not people are able to perform certain actions, and that they're really not arbiters of justice in that manner. And I think we need to stop allowing them to dictate that on our behalf, because it really will just get worse if we allow them to continue holding that power. Okay, that's it.
No, that's very true. I honestly dislike how they're using this whole COVID pandemic. Like, I understand it's serious, but I also feel that they're just using it as an excuse to not do their jobs properly.
I'm so annoyed by them, especially because I just feel like a lot of the discussions we have on the show so far have been about the lack of resources available for enforcement of environmental protection. And I just wish they would I don't want people to not have jobs, I really wish, though, that they would take 70% of the current police force and put them back a bush to protect our forests, and put them in the seas to protect our coast, because I think there they can actually do some meaningful work that they would actually also find meaningful. But as it is, I'm just like, what are they doing? Standing up in the hot sun, checking your car like that? I mean, how are we using personnel that work on behalf of the government? Are they working simply to suppress poor people and to punish Black people, especially in Belize?
Well, that discussion will not happen until majority of the Belizean population realizes for how things really are. Because at the moment, many are still defending these people, and I really don't know how. I find it quite entertaining, and I find it entertaining in order to not get mad and rant about it. So I'm just like, you know what? Poor people, they something's wrong with them, and like I'm just gonna leave it there. I know that there are others that really are concerned and want to do something about this, but if we don't get everybody on board, it's gonna be pretty difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we get everybody on board just by us having had this conversation, I think is still rare. And we invite everybody to have some version of this conversation with their friends and loved ones. And, maybe your enemies too, because maybe your enemies can become your friends by broaching the topic of police, because most people have a story about not having a good police encounter. I have several, and I'm a very socioeconomically privileged, racially privileged person. So I'm sure my stories pale in comparison to the stories of most people in Belize. Okay, So we're jumping now into our discussion of this week's topic, which is forest conservation. A topic I've been thinking a lot about in light of a book I'm currently reading for my research called Green Wars by Megan Ybarra, which was released in 2017. And it concerns the lives of Mayan peoples, indigenous peoples, uh, residing in the forest of Guatemala, and about how they are continuously being displaced, initially by colonization and then by military genocide in the 70s and 80s over there. And most recently, and perhaps oddly, by efforts to conserve forests in the area. So in the book, she makes the argument, open quote, that today the fight to save the Maya forest is often waged against the Maya people, end quote. And that aspect of conservation as a continuation of colonial control of territory into new neoliberal arrangements through global North conservation networks gives me pause in how I think about forest conservation and its beneficiaries. That's why talking to Dr. Kay was so refreshing and a relief, honestly, as she discussed with us efforts to involve community members in the coincidentally named Maya Forest that serves as a connective corridor for all Belize's forests in the form of a new trust that will be managed by Belizeans.
There's a lot more on the topic of forest conservation. We will explore in future episodes, including issues of indigenous sovereignty, the role of infrastructure, and the potential future for our forests in a warming world. For now, let's go to our conversation with Dr. Kay as she shares with us her stories of how she came to fight to conserve Belize's forests in an effort to better protect Belizeans from the toll of the climate crisis.
Today on the show, we have Dr. Elma Kay. She is the Science Director for Terrestrial Programs at the University of Belize Environmental Research Institute. She received her PhD in biology at St. Louis University with a focus in ecology, evolution, and systems. Welcome to the show, Dr. Kay.
Thank you, André and Digna. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We've been trying to set this up for a while, and I'm glad we finally locked it down. I'm glad you finally got a break from the bush. You know, Digna was in the bush a couple of weeks ago, and it seems like all the cool people are doing it. I need to do it too, I think.
Yes, it's a lot of fun. Actually, I saw a jaguar on last Thursday or Friday. Sorry, Friday. Yeah. So that was very cool.
Man, I'm envious. I saw a jaguar 2 weeks ago at the zoo. He did not look very happy to where in his condition, but it was also a pretty hot day.
Yes, yes. This one just showed us his rump, and then moved into the forest quite unperturbed. Didn't try to run away or anything. It just slowly walked along the road and heard the noise, and then moved into the bush.
I think he knew he was at home and you guys were the interlopers. So much respect to him and to you all too for leaving him be.
So I wanted to start us off with basic questions when it comes to the forest. My first question is, what are the causes of deforestation in Belize?
Yes, thanks for that question, Digna. And before I actually answer on the causes, I just wanted to make a clarification on what deforestation is, because sometimes there is a bit of confusion, I think, in how the issue is presented. I know that sometimes here at home, we assume, for example, that all logging means deforestation. But for example, that is not accurate, because deforestation is basically a big change in land use in which you actually have clearing. And globally, there are actually definitions that are used for what constitutes a forest, like how big the area has to be, how much canopy cover there needs to be, meaning, how shady it is or how much light passes through, how big the trees need to be in it. So there's actually these technical ways of defining a forest, and Belize also has to sort of pick its definition for what a forest is. And normally for forest, a definition is used like the Food and Agriculture Organization will use a definition like, for it to be considered a forest, meaning that's what would be deforested or cleared. A forest would be about 0.5 hectares, so maybe just a little bit over 1 acre in size, and it would have to have, a canopy cover of somewhere between 10% and 30%. And the trees in that forest or in that space would have to be about 5 meters or about 15 feet tall for it to be considered a forest. So I just wanted to start with that because, as I said, sometimes we say, oh, somebody's taking a tree, and we say that's deforestation. But I just want to explain that deforestation is the actual complete change of land use in an area. And for Belize, I mean, the main cause is really there's several main causes, but the biggest one is really the rapid agricultural expansion, particularly in areas like central Belize, where you have the agricultural belt, that comes from basically from the west all the way towards the east in central Belize. So that would be like the Cayo districts, the lower Orange Walk district, the Belize district. Those are the areas in Belize that are really like what we would say a hot spot for deforestation, because those are experiencing rates. Along with the forest department, we did a quick analysis when we started working on the Maya Forest Corridor project, which is that corridor is located in central Belize. And a quick study of it revealed that that area has up to 4 times the deforestation rates of anywhere else in Belize. So we have, yes, so we have a rate for Belize, which is actually just under 1%. So overall, we are doing better than say the rest of Central America, which is over 1%. We are just under 1% based on the latest statistics from the Forest Department that did an analysis basically looking at deforestation rates from 2000 to 2018. So between the year 2000 and 2018, our average deforestation rate was about 0.7%. But as you know, that's an average, so that is not distributed equally. And this is what I was saying, that it's in the central region that we are experiencing up to 4 times that national average. And I guess in terms of other causes, urban expansion would be another cause of deforestation. We are starting to see, I think, in all of our neighborhoods and across the country, as we drive around, we're starting to see more houses, pop up in areas where they weren't there before. So urban expansion is also a cause. And so those, I would say, are some of the causes, but definitely the agriculture expansion is one of them, or the main one. And within that, of course, there are differences, because you have expansion for example, crops like, corn and beans and soybeans and other things like that. But you also have the expansion in cattle. And what type of land use you have does make a difference in terms of the impacts on your soils, the impacts on your water. Cattle farming, for example, is a very intensive use. It's and we measure that intensity by how fast a forest can recover, right? So the less intense the conversion is, or the land use is, the faster you expect that if you left it alone, like a forest would grow back. And the more intense the use, then the more difficult it would be for a forest to come back. So with cattle, you experience issues like, well, definitely degradation of the biodiversity. And of course, then you have a lot of soil compaction. And the cows themselves, well, we know that, there's a lot in the news about cows contributing to global emissions because they release methane. And so, I would say one of the most impactful causes of deforestation really is for cattle ranching, even more so than crops.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of tuna rats photos of southern Belize that depict the expansion of these cattle pastures and how it leads to deforestation. One thing I'm curious about that before we move on is I'm curious about the degree of enforcement there is on the use of forested land that's then converted into cattle ranch, is that something that is heavily regulated from your understanding, or is the purchase of land, does that automatically allow someone to either, deforest it for the purposes of agriculture or for cattle ranching?
Yeah, so we definitely have some rules in place, but I would say that one of the most critical things that is missing for our country, and that I think for years, I have worked home for 15 years now. And in those 15 years, I have sat at many meetings, many workshops in which we undertake exercises related to national planning, whether it's planning for forests, whether it's planning for protected areas, whether it's planning for communities. And in all these processes, stakeholders, and this includes not just people from NGOs or people from the university. This also includes the technical personnel of the forest department. And I think that there is a very unified voice that over the years has said our country really needs a land use policy. It needs a land use policy and rules about where we do what. And in fact, only yesterday, I was having a conversation with some stakeholders about it, because it without, in the absence of that sort of land use plan, then lots of things are happening, and then people are confused. Should this be happening? Should we be upset about all forms of deforestation? Are some areas to be developed for agriculture versus, these are our key protected areas that need to be protected? And to some extent we have done that through plans. For example, the National Protected Area System Plan, the first version of that was formulated in 2005. And for example, that plan identified that corridors are a national priority in terms of completing and connecting the National Protected Area System. So you will have these isolated documents or plans, but as a whole, looking at an integrated and holistic plan for the country, we currently have not adopted a land use policy. During my time at home, it's been two of those policies that have been formulated by consultants, but we have never adopted them. And so that continues to be a fundamental, gap in how we manage lands, because then, like you said, the perceptions of, well, what should we be doing with land and what is allowed, those vary depending on what stakeholder group is speaking. And so a land use policy would really bring us to a better place and understanding of, what type of development is going to occur, and where maybe there's, it's going to be more about forest protection, for example. And so then if we had that, we wouldn't be having these debates about, is it a good place to protect, or, should we be developing it? Because that would have been clear in a holistic plan for the country. So I wanted to say that. Having said that, as I mentioned, there are these individual plans, like for protected areas, that do highlight areas where we should be protecting, for example. And there's also rules under the environmental Act, right? So under the Environmental Protection Act, there are guidelines. For example, if you are a private landowner, you do have a right to develop your land, but there are guidelines for how that development should happen. So for example, once you exceed a certain acreage, and I don't want to misspeak, it might be somewhere around like 200 acres, or 300 acres. But once you're going to clear a certain amount, and it's somewhere in that range, then that, that requires a process of evaluation of what the impacts are going to be, and the issuance of what we call an environmental compliance plan by the Department of Environment. But if you're going to clear, for example, 50 acres, that you would be able to do if that is your land, because that's your prerogative and that's your private land, and that's what your rights afford. So a lot of the times where we see the large agricultural clearings, they have usually gone through a process of putting together some type of impact assessment that then receives an environmental compliance plan from the Department of Environment.
What's the barrier to developing a policy of that sort?
Ooh, that's a very loaded question. Yes, I it's hard to say, but it does boil down to sort of, the will of our ministers, the will of our current government, whoever it is. Because really, like I said, there have been two processes in my experience. I have seen two processes undertaken for developing some sort of land use policy, or land use planning framework, or land use guidelines, that should have been endorsed, for example, by cabinet and then implemented as sort of, this is the way we do things with land. Um, and I think, a portion of it is, land is power, as in, the ability to distribute land. We always see in the news all these issues related to land, right? There's always people fighting for land, or people wanting land, or people saying that some people were given land unfairly, or other people saying that they didn't get any land, and that isn't, that's not fair as well. And so, these land issues, we constantly see them in the news. And some of this is happening because the systems are not in place as they should be, with like I say, the land use, and not just the land use policy, but the land tenure guidelines, land tenure rules on, on how things should be. And so in the absence of those things, then a few people have the power to dictate on those things, and that means that, we no longer do things in a sort of open system in which you would have a policy that dictates that this is how you do things. So I think, the political will has to be there, to bring in full transparency to the process of land use, of land distribution, of land tenureship, of land rights. All of those things really, I don't think it's impossible to formulate clear rules on how it operates, but that would remove power from individuals for sure.
And when it comes to environmental issues, it does surprise me in many ways, because you and other people have spoken on this on this show, and it's become a recurrent theme, the idea of political will, and that actually often being the biggest barrier. And then it just calls into question, well, then what are they doing? And how do we pressure them to muster up that will? How do we take our will and channel it into their legislative action?
And Andre, to clarify, I would say that a lot of people use political will as a sort of something very loose, like, we invoke it in things that even don't require political will. We must be careful. We must be careful when we speak about political will. I think for issues related, for example, to why we do not have a land use policy, that might be hitting the nail on the head. But I think with many other things, you don't necessarily need political will. You need your own will. You need your own volition. You need your own ability to organize as a group and clamor for something. So I want to be, clear that, as you said, it's been sort of a recurrent theme, and something that a lot of people have spoken about as, we need political will for everything. But I mean, I do believe also that, within governments, there are always allies. There's always people that want to do things right. A lot of the technical people have also been there, irrespective of administrations, and have a clear picture of the, what should be the national plan. So some of that is there. But yes, for something like land, that must absolutely come from the highest levels, so I believe that this is a case where we must say the political will and muscle must be exerted to try and change systems from the inside. From the outside, we are really the voters, we are the constituents, we are the ones that must vote according to, to the things that are to be implemented, or to the character of the people that are running for office, those types of things. So that's where we need to examine ourselves, and also we need to look at, what alliances can we create to clamor for something better, or for, for something, for example, like the land use policy. And so I think individually everybody's been asking for it, but there's never been a movement to say, this really, we need this. And if you think about it, we are part of that system as well, because, even if you take, for example, saying that, somebody politically affiliated is going to give out land, right? You wouldn't, if you are the person or the recipient accepting that land, then you are part of that system, correct?
Whew. Dr. K, you said it right there. I am totally of that mind as well, because it can often seem this thing that we're blaming those at the top, but not realizing how we're mirroring their same behavior in our own actions, and how by doing that, then we are, like you said, perpetuating, and we are complicit and supporting their behavior. So yeah, but it's hard because, like you are also saying, people are always clamoring that they want land. And I think in a lot of people's eyes, access to land for themselves symbolizes some degree of security regarding their own future. And I guess that allure is sometimes it outweighs the sense of morality or collective moral obligation, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And I would definitely be the last one, to judge. Some people, for example, will have the ability to fill in an application and apply for a bank loan. And, that's how I got my lot in Belmopan. You go through these processes to get it, right? You work and you apply for a loan, and then you pay your mortgage, and then you own your land, right? But many people do not have, that ability or the resources to do that. Like, what would be the collateral for a loan? So absolutely, we must understand the plight of, of those that do not have access or resources,
That was really a lot, and it's true. Even me, sometimes, like, I wonder, like, as a young person, it's like, oh, it does bring some sense of security having a land. I don't know for what reason, but at past, in the past, because of family and political ties, whatever, at some point my morality was questioned. Like, I questioned my own morality, but as I was, the more I learn, the more I see, I'm just like, I do not want to be a problem, and I do not want to contribute to what Belize has become to. But anyways, thank you for that, Miss Kay. I would really like to know, how is it that you got into, what motivated you to want to help conserve and restore our forests?
Yes, Digna. Well, I grew up in a forested area. I mean, when we were kids, I actually grew up in Progreso Village in the Corozal district, and I went to high school in Orange Walk, and we had a lot of family in Orange Walk. So I sort of, I claim both districts as my own, Corozal geographically and Orange Walk culturally. But I would say that, I grew up in an area with a lot of forest. When we were kids at night, we had no electricity. You would, look out your window and it was pitch black, because it was just forest around us. My parents built their home in a lot that they had, but it was far away from the rest of the village. And so, we grew up, going to swim in the lagoon and run around in the forest. And I don't know, I feel like we kind of grew up like weeds, just just as part of that. We would go with my dad, to the small milpa, and then later to the sugarcane fields. And so I think, that connection with the environment was always there. But I would say that my first opportunity or inkling that this was something that I really wanted to do would have been my first year of sixth form. I received, they used program for Belize would make these announcements where they would grant these scholarships to Belizeans to accompany groups from abroad that would come to visit Rio Bravo. And I remember that in my first summer attending St. John's College sixth form in Belize City, the opportunity came up to apply. And my adopted sister and I both were like, we want to do this. And so we applied for the opportunity, and we were selected as the candidates to accompany this group from abroad that was spending 1 week in the Rio Bravo and 1 week at South Water Key. And those were the early days of Program for Belize. That was when Program for Belize the Rio Bravo had just been bought, and, they were doing their thing. It was like a big thing for Belize, the whole conservation of this beautiful big area, and the birth of Program for Belize as an organization to manage that area. And that was just a different experience. Growing up, we were just like in the forest, and that was normal. And here was an experience in which I was in the forest, but I was also learning a lot about the ecology of the forest, how forests grow, how these beautiful big trees that are there, and just the dynamics of interactions, and just the whole biology and ecology of it. And it fascinated me. And then we followed the week in Rio Bravo by a week at Saltwater Key. And that was incredible, because as a child, I never had the opportunity, for Easter, we had a lagoon in the village. So our Easters were spent in the water, but not traveling anywhere. You hear a lot of people like closer to Belize City that would say, oh, well, we went to Key, or we went somewhere, close to the sea. Well, we had the lagoon. So we never went anywhere like that. We didn't have opportunities to visit the reef. So that was my first experience snorkeling and seeing the reef at Saltwater Key. And I mean, that experience was just like, I think I could have gone either way. I'm a diver. I love forests. I love reefs, and reefs actually to a large extent also the interactions and the way reefs operate ecologically. There's a lot of similarity to how forests operate. And so that was just fascinating for me. And I think that was the beginnings of my years in high school, but definitely my years in sixth form. Started, and those experiences started solidifying my interest in conservation. And we also formed a club, the Students United for Nature at St. John's, and we would attend these environmental things and have cleanups and stuff like that. So the interest was there. And I think it was something that I grew up with, but, the experiences as I got older sort of started cementing in my head that this was a good field for me.
Your origin story is so cool. My origin story for becoming a writer was being in a sixth form teacher's office and crying because I thought my poems weren't good enough. That led me to being a writer. And I don't know, sometimes I think what it's like, man, I should have had a better story than that. But that's really the truth of it. So I wanted to ask you.
All stories are good, as long as they lead you to doing something fulfilling that feels like, yeah, this is something that you should be doing.
No, totally. That's yeah. Yours just sounds so fun. You're currently involved, I believe, in at least 2 different conservation area projects. Can you describe them and tell us the goals of those projects?
So the first project is the Belize Maya Forest project. And I wanted to speak about that one first because it's the larger of the 2 projects. It's 236,000 acres that were acquired for protection by the Nature Conservancy. But what I wanted to mention about it is that the Nature Conservancy's intent is not to own that land. In fact, the intent is to create a Rio Bravo type model in which the land is put in trust for the government and people of Belize. And it's a trust in perpetuity that is managed by a local trustee or an NGO. And in this case, the NGO would be the Belize Maya Forest Trust, of which I am a director. This model of conservation has been used in the past. As I said, it was employed for the Rio Bravo, more recently for the Northeast Corridor. And this is where lands are bought and put, like I say, in trust for the government and people of Belize. And why do we want to entrust them and protect them in perpetuity? Well, because they provide for us a lot of what we call ecosystem services and goods. And in this particular case, I think one of the most critical services that this area provides for many Belizeans, particularly in the north, is its watershed value. The fact that that forest is there means that, there is no, man has not invented a machine yet that can create water. There is only one way of getting water and rainfall, and that is through forest. There is nothing that can replace that. We've not been able to figure out anything else. We know that the more forest we cut, the less water we have. The more forest we have, the more water comes down and gets, the trees in the evening release that vapor, and then that eventually comes back down as rain. And that is just simply how it works.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the main benefits of the area, apart from the fact that, of course, it has incredible biodiversity. Basically, all the signature wildlife that we know it is thriving in this area. So this area is a house for that biodiversity. It's a water factory for, our communities in the north, particularly in the Rio Hondo watershed. But a portion of that forest also sits in the New River and Belize watersheds as well. So those are the benefits of the area, and that if one day that forest was gone, there was a lot that we were going to lose in terms of biodiversity and, like I say, watershed services. So that's the first one of them. And then the second project is something that actually also goes way back, and it's more closely tied to the history of our institute at the University of Belize. Because when we formed the institute in late 2009, early 2010, one of the very first projects that we undertook was to study jaguar populations and the movement of animals in collaboration with our partner Panthera, which is a cat conservation organization based in the US. And in fact, we had joint staff that were working in this joint program between Panthera and the University of Belize Environmental Research Institute. And one of the areas that we were studying was in central Belize. At the time, that area was known as the Central Belize Corridor. And the idea with those studies was to understand if that corridor was still functioning, basically, if animals were moving through, how they were moving through, because we knew that was a critical connection between our northern block of forest in the Rio Bravo and the now Belize Maya Forest and the southern Maya Mountain Massif. So we always knew that was the little connecting piece. And you might say, well, why is connectivity important? Why did we even want to get involved in that project in terms of, the benefits to people? But connectivity is something that all populations, whether it's humans or whether it's animals, we need connectivity. And we can look at it in something just in terms of, for example, our genetics, right? Having genetics that are varied, meaning the ability for animals to breed with animals that are of a different genetic makeup, as in they're not close relatives. That is very important because that gives organisms the ability to withstand and to adapt, right? So if you have a storm coming through, whether it's a hurricane or something that lowers your population, or whether it's a disease that comes to your population, the more variable the more genetic variability we have. So the more different we are genetically, the more resistant, resilient we are. So connectivity is very important to the long-term survival of these wildlife populations. For 10 years, we studied the Central Belize Corridor. And as we were conducting those studies, right before our eyes, the landscape was changing. And basically, a lot of the forest was coming down. So we actually rebranded to the Maya Forest Corridor, which is the current project that we are working on now. And we're trying to save that area. And it has a new name because also it's a shrunken version of what was once the Central Belize Corridor. And that is the area in particular where I was mentioning that 4 times the deforestation, 4 times the average deforestation rate for Belize. That's the area where we're really seeing that we have been working with the communities in the corridor for a long time and the stakeholders, because that corridor area has the Belize Zoo. That corridor area has Monkey Bay Wildlife Sanctuary. That corridor area has the Runaway Creek Nature Reserve. And then that corridor area has La Democracia, Mahogany Heights, St. Matthews, some of the communities in the River Valley. So, these are communities and an area in which we have been working on for a while. And in fact, the communities in the area, the stakeholders in the area, all agree that this connectivity is important to maintain, not just because of the benefits it brings to their area, in terms of living healthy systems and biodiversity, but also for this little piece connects our entire protected area system and links all of Belize forest to the trinational Selva Maya, is the largest forest in this side after the Amazon. And that is not insignificant. And so this corridor, this little 90,000 acre corridor pretty much links our Maya Mountains to our northern forest, and basically means that all of Belize's forests are connected to this amazing regional forest.
Is there any component to the Maya Forest Project that involves discussions of carbon sequestration, carbon taxing, benefiting from carbon systems that are provided largely by global north countries or global north financial institutions? Is that in any way a discussion component of it? I'm asking because of, recent talks. I don't know if you remember them when Biden was in talks with Brazil's president Bolsonaro, where he basically trying to incentivize him to not continue in the rampant deforestation that has occurred in the Amazon since his election in 2017.
I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding out there of how carbon works, or maybe also a lack of information about anything related to carbon rights, carbon credits, how do you sell carbon. And the one thing I will say is the opportunity is there for our country to obtain benefits from this, including for private sector or other people that want to protect forests, in order for us to be able to take it all the way to not just measuring how much carbon we sequester, but getting payments for it. Those are called results-based payments. That means that we have to mount a machinery to monitor, report, and verify on that carbon. And that machinery requires technology and science and people, right, to be able to do that. And I think that is one of the places where we are highly advanced. The Forest Department is doing a fantastic job, as well as the Red Plus, the Climate Change Office that holds the Red Plus program. So we're quite advanced in the science of being able to track what as a country we are sequestering. The whole carbon markets are built around the premise that if I'm going to buy your carbon, this is for the benefit of biodiversity and the benefit of people. So it cannot be something where we just sell those credits and take all the money and clear more land, or who knows, maybe even pay the super bond. The payments are really given so that we can benefit communities, especially those like indigenous people and the communities that don't have access to sort of normal things that people need for good human health and well-being. The conservation groups have been pioneers in developing what we call these more private carbon projects. But the funds are invested in good things. The funds are not going to individuals, they're not going to, like in the case of the Nature Conservancy and the Belize Maya Forest, those funds are not going to go to the Nature Conservancy. They're going to come back to the Belize Maya Forest Trust, or that's what we would hope, so that the forest can be managed and that we can develop programs, with our different stakeholder groups.
One thing in which we can benefit from is that with carbon rollouts, I don't know if you saw that there was recently a report that showed that California's carbon tax system was pretty much a failure, and it had been a failure for a decade, where the money wasn't going to the right places, and a lot of it was just a means of delaying decreasing emissions by, those top industries that are producing the majority of the emissions in the world. So it just feels like, yeah, we need to get a bigger understanding on this and bigger education, both in schools, but also just, I'm so glad we spoke about this because it's not a conversation I get to have enough.
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me. I'd be happy to come back on the show again. Anything I can do to to help spread the word and knowledge and understanding, and that as a country, the intent of these conservation projects and all of that is not to do bad. And so the conversation is important, to ensure that things are going in the right direction and that balance is struck, because ultimately it is about balance. We could clear this entire country and convert it all to cornfields or to cattle pasture, and as a country we would be no richer. I can guarantee that.
Thank you to Dr. Elma Kay for her time, and to you, our followers, for tuning into our show. If you like the show, please consider writing a review for us over on Apple Podcasts, as it helps to increase the show's visibility. If you write a 5-star review, we will read it in a future episode.
If you have a climate crisis or environmental story impacting Belize you'd like to discuss, you can contact us at madafyah@gmail.com or message us on Facebook and Twitter at Mada Fyah, and be sure to hit that follow button.
We encourage you to subscribe to the show so you can hear all of the other episodes that we have coming up this season.
Thanks to Alexander Evans for providing our theme song. You can find him on Instagram at Alexander Evans Music. And thanks to Demi Williams for providing our artwork.
And thanks to you for listening to Mada Fyah. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode.
And remember, climate change is real and collective effort is needed to save our home.
Rest when you can and find some shade.